Hello there and welcome to the latest edition of the SME Souk podcast, brought to you by RAKBANK Business. My name's Richard Dean. I'm a journalist based here in the UAE, and today we're talking about the issue of credit bureaus and how they impact small businesses here in the UAE. Who better than to have as our guest today? We welcome His Excellency Marwan Lutfi, Director General of the Etihad Credit Bureau. Ahlan wa sahlan. Good to have you with us, Your Excellency.
Thank you for having me.
Also, we've got Tom Baxendale from RAKBANK, the Head of Digital at Business Banking at RAKBANK. Tom, good to have you with us.
Pleasure to be here.
Your Excellency, if we can start with a bit of history on the Etihad Credit Bureau. 10 years old now. Just tell us a little bit about the Bureau and the history of the Bureau.
Absolutely. I think the idea behind the Bureau is really how can you really ease access to finance. That was the main goal of what the credit bureau is supposed to be doing, focusing on individuals but also on the business. Normally credit bureaus would start with the individual business, but we decided to start both together, the individual and the company business. We started in 2012 when the credit information law was issued in 2010. The company was set up in 2012, a wholly owned company by the federal government, and we set up the system and we started issuing the first credit reports in the UAE in November 2014 specifically. And I think that is when we started on how we integrate with all banks to become critical infrastructure and ease that process of even automating decisions across. And over the past 10 years, we've introduced so many different products within the UAE, and now we are considered part of, part and parcel of the banking system as a whole.
So a lot has changed, obviously, since then, and will continue to change. But as we get ready to light the candles on the 10th birthday cake, one of the things you've done, which I know you think is important, is this agreement you've got with Al Ansari Exchange. So tell us what that is and why, for small businesses in particular here in the UAE, that's important.
Well, consent is a very important part of the law itself. So individuals was very easy when it comes to obtaining consent. We've launched our digital channels. We've actually partnered with some banks where you can access your own credit reports and scores through our portal, through our apps, or through banking apps. But with the evolution of UAE Pass specifically, it's very easy to authenticate individuals. When it comes to businesses, you get into a much more bigger legal complexity. And with that, I believe you need to ensure that the person who's asking for that confidential information is authorized to access that information. And with that process, normally it used to be a very cumbersome manual process. And what we've done here is actually we've simplified the process where companies can apply for their credit report on our website, but then visit any of the 250 Ansari Exchange branches to just verify their identification and whether they're actually authorized to actually pull that credit report and get it on their email instantly.
It's a really good digital experience, and we integrate with the credit bureau through our onboarding and our lending journeys at RAKBANK. Just help us understand a bit more about the credit assessment landscape in the UAE and why it's important for small businesses.
I think small businesses are still way far from where we want them to be. It's very important. Look, the UAE today, I would say 85% of the companies set up here are actually considered to be SMEs, if not even more, hitting near 90%.
Yes.
What banks would look at, and including RAKBANK and others, would actually normally look at SMEs as individuals. And where we see the differences now, today there's a lot of awareness about when individuals are applying for loans, where they actually understand what their credit score is, what the credit report includes, what impacts their credit worthiness and whether they're going to be accepted or rejected through any facility they apply for. When it comes to companies, many of these companies are new startups. When you're looking at new startups, the company might not have a credit history. What we've built is very important, that we've not only looked at financial obligations, we've looked at specifically the utilities and the telcos behind that, which means companies can start building history by maintaining a good credit history and good payment cycles with the utilities and the other entities that actually they have financial obligations to. So it's very important to understand today that every company has a credit registry record, but also need to know that this is the basis of what you're going to get into in the future when you come to credit facilities.
That's a really important point. So if I'm a small business, I'm a fintech, I'm in the IFC or any of the trade license free zones, how do I present myself as bankable, and what do I do in order to raise my credit score?
It's very important to look at credit score when it comes to how do you maintain a good payment behavior, because a credit score really is a score that predicts how likely an entity is going to miss a payment in the next 12 months. What banks normally would want to look at is whether this company is actually committed to paying its obligations on time. And on time, I will stress here, is the most important thing. And again, if you cannot access that, because normally the first part of financing or debt that you get is actually more cash, not necessarily credit or debt to that specifically. And with that, how can you build the history? Is really by ensuring that your utility payments, your telco payments are made on time, so you can build that right, basically credit history. On top of that, it also comes down to the entrepreneurs behind these companies and these individuals and partners. A lot of entities today, when they want to assess a new company, they'll assess the people behind them. So you look at the partners, you look at the managers of these companies, and the behavior of their own credit, basically behavior and history, actually generally is a reflection of how they're going to be managing the company.
So, Your Excellency, if we can talk a little bit about how we're defining an SME. You talked about the fact that it's, 85 to 90% of companies here in the UAE are SMEs, small to medium-sized enterprises. But you touched on this. That covers such a wide range. It can be an owner-managed business that's just set up a couple of weeks ago in a free zone.
Absolutely.
It could be a business that's been around for several decades with 100 million, 200 million dirhams of turnover. How do you define the different segments or segment SME, and how do you approach them differently?
There are clear definitions of how SMEs are defined in the UAE under the Ministry of Economy. There are clear laws about this. However, it's not that easy because also accessing information is not that easy. There are two components that we look at. From our side, we look at one component, but there are two missing components. So the two missing components that are not easily reported is size, which is number of employees. And these are things that you'll see from data that is published by NAFIS, the UAE Competitiveness Council, where you look at how the Emiratization is going to go into this, and you look at the number of companies that are actually in that program. And there's limits and thresholds that have been set, which is really companies up to 50 employees must employ one UAE national. So it just tells you a little bit about where that SME size fits. If you look at that as a benchmark, up to 50 employees, then the second mark is actually the revenue. And revenue is very difficult to attain. Now, depending on your relationship with the bank, sometimes there'll be a lot of sharing of balance sheets and cash flows, but also revenue is a very clear component which we don't have. So we actually compensate for that through credit exposure. So we look at really the size of that company through how much borrowings they have, and that generally will give us an insight of basically, and our borrowings, I mean, you'll see different at banks, but we're looking at anywhere between 5 to 10 million of exposure, where you really are up to 10 million of exposure, where we really classify what an SME is.
We were talking before the show on the importance of credit education for people, and specifically in the UAE versus different regions. What resources do you think we can point small businesses to educate themselves on credit scoring?
Well, one thing that we're trying to be focusing on, I think in the very near future, we're testing our new consumer digital channels. In the end of the SMEs are made up of individuals, right? We label them as SMEs, but at the end of the day, they're individuals running businesses. And if we don't even communicate to these individuals and make the individuals understand, that they will not be able to take this across to the companies they represent. And I think for us, we're going to be ensuring as a credit bureau, the sole credit bureau in the UAE, to actually ensure that we push so much on financial literacy. One of the very important components that we're trying to push for is really what impacts your score. In many situations, you'll be sitting, whether you're having dinner with friends or in official settings, and someone will say, what does my credit score mean? What does a 750 mean versus a 650? Now, banks are very sophisticated and they understand credit risk and how these sort of point systems work and how we can measure risk. But as individuals or companies, sometimes it doesn't make sense to you. And what we are trying to do in our new approach to how we become much more closer financial sort of companions to the individuals and companies is explain exactly in real time what are the components that are impacting your score. And this is something that we've been working so hard on, and we expect in the next few months we'll be testing with our new portals and basically digital apps that actually will give you that ability to be on the spot without even coming and asking us or asking the bank. In many cases, you'll see people asking the banks, what does this mean, right?
Yeah.
And I think as an industry, we have to come together. We work very closely with the UAE Banks Federation as well, that will ensure that we push the right message with the Banks Federation, but also with the right government entities to improve financial literacy.
Well, Tom, if I can ask a question about that,
Sure.
For SMEs, how do you as a bank integrate this information into your credit decisions, into some of the digital banking apps that you have at the moment, and also that you're developing? How does that work?
So it's a really good point. It's an API-enabled infrastructure. It allows us to call the information directly from our digital onboarding and lending journeys. So as a customer goes through requesting a bank account or a loan or access to finance, information that's input into that system then goes and pulls information from the credit bureau. We use that in a sophisticated algorithm to assess that company's credit worthiness and different risk layers through our assessment matrices.
Absolutely.
And then that customer is either provided access to a bank account or a loan digitally without having to go manually into a branch or speak to a human.
And if I could ask a follow-up question on that, because Your Excellency Marwan, you were saying 10th anniversary of going live at the end of this year. You, I know, Tom, have been in the UAE for that period, and you've been working essentially on this kind of thing.
Yep,
How have you both seen the way that the credit bureau integrates with banks, particularly for small businesses and business banking, over the past 10 years? Because it must have changed.
Mm-hmm.
But Your Excellency, first of all, what changes have you seen?
I think one of the things I always used to comment on, I've been since the setup of the bureau, over 11 years with the bureau, and I've seen it when I remember applying for a credit card as an individual, and you'll be filling forms. And you're saying, this is what I have. You say, we'll have to declare how many credit cards do you have, and all of these things. And I used to fill them by hand. And knowing people in the industry, what would happen in the past would be, let me make a phone call. And Richard would be calling Tom and saying, I have this applicant. Do you know of this applicant if he has any exposures with you? And this was the reality of how it was happening, to check whether someone has an exposure or not. So whether you're good at having the right network, you probably would be basing it on a few phone calls and saying, yes, well, I'll approve Marwan as an applicant or not. What has changed significantly is by aggregating all of this and putting it in a form of a report, be it in a PDF report, but most banks, including RAK and others, integrate. So they take the data points, they feed it in their systems where they can build decision parameters, where they're saying, based on these parameters, you can pre-approve, you can pre-authorize. It changed the entire industry in automating the application process. Hence why now you can go online, you'll see things where they're saying, a 30-second or 30-minute pre-approval process for a mortgage or for an application. All of that is really about because we integrated data. The credit registry today, which has over 18 million individuals and companies in it, over 25 million contracts and facilities that are actually reported into this, right? This is extremely essential because we also have the credit registry updated on a daily basis. I remember when we launched, it was a monthly basis. We actually shifted as a credit bureau, even that from more advanced bureaus, they don't even have daily reporting. So our reporting is on daily basis, which means today I can basically pay a card, tomorrow I can actually apply and my DBR will change. Everything changes dynamically because it's really updated on a daily basis. So we have really become integral to the banking infrastructure, and hopefully have eased the process of basically an application or a bank operating.
Certainly, and for me, it's the instant information, not just of what you're requesting for the particular bank that you're calling that service for, but you have access to all of the information from other banks as well. So it's all centralized in one particular place, which ultimately makes the UAE and the banking system much safer, much more secure.
I mean, I saw you laughing when Marwan was telling those stories about filling out a credit card form by hand, but we're all old enough to remember those days, aren't we?
Well, yeah, we've moved a long way from, paper forms in branch having to go into a system to be scanned, to then go into what we call a workflow system, to be checked by a person, to then go into our core banking systems. Now, all of this is digitized, automated, and called instantly.
So if we look forward to the next 10 years, I'm guessing AI is going to play a role in that. Other things will as well. What can you tell us, Your Excellency, about the next 10 years?
I think focusing on the SME sector, it's been the talk of the town for the past decade, right? And as I said, we're moving in small, steady steps forward. We need to look at how can we really jump to the next level. And with next level, banking basically for SMEs is very different than banking for individuals. Individuals is a little bit easier to manage. With SMEs, I think government is really pushing on several new initiatives on creating basically facilities and tools and platforms that will ease the instant onboarding, be it eKYC platforms and other that is in progress, and the banks are aware of it, and we're working with the Central Bank of the UAE on this. But most importantly is cash flow financing. And I think that is the next big step. When we're saying today, if an entity sets up today and cannot easily access finance from the first year of operation until it's stable, right? What can you do? How can you introduce cash flow financing? And these are things which are really trying to look at, even from our side, how do we report receivables? It's very important because understanding the receivables of an SME gives you great insight. So basically trying to match that with the credit information, even if it's basic utility and telco payment behavior, will give you significant jump on really how you can assess basically an SME, and how can you give them basically credit lines based on the actual cash flows and receivables that they have.
I mean, that's interesting from your perspective, cash flow financing.
Asset-backed
financing is one thing, but cash flow financing is another.
Yeah, it's an incredible game changer. It's something that we're actively looking into. From an AI perspective, we're taking small steps, obviously. It's a new technology. We've been very cautious with it. But the advantage that AI gives you is the ability to assess massive data sets. So at the minute, cash flow financing is particularly tricky because you're looking at minuscule interactions of customers and trying to map that to creditworthiness or financing. And AI can do that instantly and remove the manual nature of it.
I think in other markets, I remember when we were looking at some markets in Asia, including Singapore, there are so many instant lending platforms today. Why is that? It's not because RAKBanks and others are not ready to create these platforms. It's about having access to the ecosystem. And with a lot of cloud accounting going online, right? And all of these things now with, of course, the taxation, the tax basically authorities, income, corporate tax, all of these matters. Soon, eventually, you see everyone's trying to really automate their accounting. Everyone's really outsourcing their accounting. And with companies, so many companies right now that provide us the ability to actually integrate that will be a game changer. For us, from a receivables point of view, and there are several other government basically initiatives on that front, we are trying to also look at how can we really maybe plug in that to add it to the credit report that today the banks are accessing. Because to us, we are a distribution channel of information. And while we have all of this data, we are very well positioned to capture more data and feed it into this existing infrastructure. And if I can feed it into a bank, then a bank can easily actually say, well, guess what, I'm going to use this data and actually start improving and actually offering this facility or that facility to these entities. And I think that's where we come into play, or as a critical ecosystem provider, and how can we really plug in and bolt on different data sets.
And we're very lucky to be in a region with a very progressive government and a progressive central bank. So all of these things are, being actively worked on by very intelligent people with very sophisticated systems. We're growing these ecosystems around us as we go along. It's moving very, very quickly, so it's difficult from a digital perspective to keep up. But it's certainly, I'd say, regional leading in the UAE currently.
So bottom line, I'm a journalist. These are the questions that we get asked all the time. From small business owners, they want easier access to opening bank account and getting credit. And they want better terms for that credit. They want lower interest rates for that credit. Is all of this going to help to satisfy their need? Your Excellency, first of all.
I think it's already happening on the individuals. What we need to be focusing on right now is how can we transfer what's already happening with individuals to the banking sector. And this definitely is happening. You're looking at the federal government, but also on the local government. So much effort is being put to actually bring all of this together, but having access, easing access of opening bank accounts. Several different governments are looking at how, and there are great examples of how now you can really open a bank account in a really short period of time, if not sometimes instantly as well. You're looking at access to finance, but also when you're looking at better rates. That's something that is happening with individuals. It's just when we have the ecosystem around the business community in place, then automatically these things will just flow like an avalanche.
Just on a follow-up to that, it wasn't long ago that a business bank account opening turnaround time was 30 days, 40 days, 50 days. Technologies like this allow us to integrate with our systems so that the account onboarding experience is now minutes, hours, and a few days.
Absolutely. I would say, I think really probably what can the Bureau do to actually improve that ecosystem? I think that's one thing that's, or sort of new data sets that we're adding. And I think I can probably talk a lot about how we're integrating with other government entities to make that information that is sitting in different data points easily accessible to them.
Okay. So just before we wrap up, Your Excellency, in terms of your to-do list going forward, you've got the 10th anniversary in November. Great. Blow out the candles. What's your top of the to-do list going forward?
Being a federal government entity, one of our key objectives is how we actually add value to the UAE ecosystem, and we are on a venture into really making use of the infrastructure that we've built over the past 10 years, and how can we make data points that the banking sector requires easily accessible through us. So we're working with entities like Ministry of Human Resources and Emiratisation. We're looking at various different data sources where with banks, every bank operates differently, where this bank might need these 2 data points, another bank might need 3 other data points. What we see from the banking sector is we are approached all the time through the Banks Federation, through banks directly as well, where you're saying, can you please provide us access with the number of employees from the Ministry of Human Resources and Emiratisation. And I think these are things we're working on with the likes of the Ministry of, if we can push that data, then automatically they'll have one more data point that will probably open a vast array of opportunities for the banks and the SMEs alike.
You have to play nicely with an awful lot of organizations, don't you, to get that data?
Absolutely. I think that's very important for us, where we really ensure that data privacy is there. But also, I think the key is, how do we convert data into indicators that can enable banks to take decisions? And I think that's the critical point where we keep focusing on, is not about exposing confidential data, but it's really how do you create basically the ecosystem and really the boundaries and limits on how you actually say, I'll take this data, I'll convert it in an indicator, I plug it in their system, and they'll say, fantastic, I have 5 indicators that will go into my decision-making system, and I'll be able to actually do 1, 2, 3, not only 1, 2, 3, but actually 5, 6, 7, right?
Your Excellency, congratulations on the first 10 years. Here's looking forward to the next 10 years. Shukran jazeelan. Thank you very much indeed for your time today.
Thank you very much.
His Excellency, our guest today, Marwan Lutfi, the Director General of Etihad Credit Bureau. Also, Tom Baxendale with us today on the pod. Thanks very much indeed. From RAKBANK, the Head of Digital within Business Banking at RAKBANK. And of course, join us next time on the next episode of the SME Suit podcast, brought to you by RAKBANK Business.